There is a growing threat of a food crisis due to the waste and misuse of water. Water is wasted through outdated agricultural practices, such as irrigation, in which bodies of water are being used up before the usable water can be replenished. The current method of growing food for livestock is inefficient, as it misuses resources, such as grain and water. Farmers are forced to overpump their aquifers to make enough food for the growing population. The depletion of aquifers and other natural bodies of fresh water are quickly being depleted, which leads to periods of low food production. Currently, there are about 1.2 billion people in areas plagued by physical water scarcity, meaning they lack enough water to satisfy demand, including enough water to sustain ecosystems. Paired with higher temperatures and a growing demand for food, the wider crisis in which millions of people go without food and safe water is a serious threat. The effects can already be seen in regions such as the Middle East and Northern Africa that have plentiful water and land, but food production is putting the area under strain because of the loss of water and the exportation of food. The depletion of natural bodies of water and the use of biofuel in water-poor countries, such as India, is reducing their amount of usable water. Biofuels, overpumping aquifers, agricultural practices, the presence of an expanding population, and the waste of water contributes to a potential food crisis. Watering crops through irrigation is important to a potential food crisis because it uses up fresh water faster than it can be replenished. Farmers are pressured to overpump aquifers, which artificially inflates food production in the short run, creating a food bubble that bursts when aquifers are depleted and pumping is necessarily reduced to the rate of recharge. The food bubble works for a while and lulls the farmers and consumers into a false sense of food security. When the bubble bursts and the aquifers are depleted, there will be no food until the farmers find a new water source. The natural bodies of water, such as aquifers, are losing volume to other causes, such as climate change. This process will come to an end when there are no more natural bodies of usable water. As the population goes up, so will the demand for clean drinking water and water for agriculture. Farmers will need to produce more food, but will not be able to because of the lack of water. This will lead to food being solely produced in nations that can afford to produce enough food to meet the demands of their population. The high cost of food will lower trade with countries in need, as well as hurting lower-income citizens in countries producing food. Therefore, overpumping aquifers for irrigation will lead to less food at a higher cost, which will inevitably lead to a food crisis. The ever-growing world population is an important factor to a potential food crisis, as it will increase the demand for clean water for direct consumption and through agriculture. According to the United Nations, we will add approximately 2 billion people by 2050 and an additional 1 billion by the turn of the century. There are already millions worldwide that have inadequate food, either in quantity or quality. Many of those who have been born recently and most of those who will be born during the food crisis will live in impoverished, developing, and third world countries. The lack of fresh water in such countries is established. The water in developing countries often carries dirt and disease. Along with a growing population, there will be less water for drinking and even less water for growing crops and raising livestock. Dirty water will need to be utilized, which will cause illness in humans and in livestock. Water will affect first world countries as well by limiting the amount of food that can be grown or collected from animals. This will contribute to food deserts, and those who live in them will have to travel farther to find accurate nutrition. With a bigger population consuming cleaner water, there will be less water for agriculture, thus food will cost more. A growing population will lead to less food at a higher price, which will be a food crisis because most of the population will not have access or the ability to pay for it. Water used for growing food for livestock is wasteful and could lead to a potential food crisis. About 1/3 of the grain produced for livestock, and when the grain is fed to animals, producing a kilogram of meat takes much more water, between 5,000 and 15,000 liters. Growing and producing grain uses a significant amount of water, and feeding it to the livestock wastes more. The amount of meat that is packaged for human use after production has less calories and costs more in water than simply using the grain to feed humans. The water for producing meat is mostly lost, while the water made for growing plants for consumption wastes less, as plant-based foods contain more water than meat. Continuing to grow grain to feed livestock will result in less and more expensive food because of the amount of food and water that goes into raising livestock and packaging them for consumption. There is enough food to feed the world, however, when feeding it to livestock there is not enough. The amount of water wasted when feeding grain to livestock could contribute to a potential food crisis. Water is being wasted faster than it can be replenished, which contributes to a potential food crisis. People in the first world countries waste more water as people individually just need 2 to 5 liters of drinking water and 20 to 400 of waters for household use every day. In reality, far more. Between 2,000 and 5,000 liters of water per person per day is being used. Water is used inefficiently in most first world homes as they have not been affected by a lack of water, and in turn do not value it enough to use it wisely. The widespread overconsumption of water in developed countries will lead to a water crisis and a food crisis worldwide. First world countries like the United States export millions of dollars of food to several other countries. By producing more food than is necessary for feeding the U.S. population, water is being used faster than it can be replenished. The less water there is, the more expensive it becomes, thus driving up the prices of food production itself and food itself. As water is integral to producing food, water in developed countries that export food leaves less water for agriculture, thus hurting countries that depend on them for food. The Middle East and North Africa, called the MENA region, is losing water due to wealthier countries using their land to grow and export food, which could lead to a food crisis. This overuse of the region's land for agriculture has caused the region to be water scarce, as the renewable water availability is less than the 100 meter to the third power person per year threshold, which determines water scarcity. The use of the MENA region's land by other countries for agriculture is harming their population directly by reducing the amount of clean water for consumption and agriculture. It is indirectly affecting the area's population by overusing their land, which makes it harder to grow food. Growing food for other countries uses up their land and water, making it harder for the countries in the MENA region to make enough food to feed their citizens. The diminishing amount of water in the MENA region will affect the countries that use their land for agriculture, as the amount of food will decrease. As the Middle East and North Africa dries up, food production for much of the world will decrease, contributing to a potential food crisis. Biofuels reduce greenhouse gases, however, they use too much water to be sustainable, thus contributing to a potential food crisis. India struggles with water scarcity and have increased biofuel production to meet 10% of its transportation fuel demand by 2030, will require an estimated 22 cubic kilograms more irrigation water. According to Molden, India currently uses 440 cubic kilograms of water for food production every year. Water levels have been consistently decreasing worldwide, and India has already been struggling with water scarcity for several decades and will not be able to use more water in the future. If India indeed uses 22 more cubic kilograms, they will deplete many of their natural bodies of water. This will decrease the amount of safe drinking water as well as reduce the amount of water for watering their crops using traditional methods such as irrigation. Less water will make it harder for India to transport their food in their own country by using biofuel to power transportation. This will lead to India producing less food and needing to rely on other countries, contributing to a worldwide potential food crisis. Or, water plays a critical role to a potential food crisis. Irrigation and other common agricultural practices are using more water than necessary. The increasing need to produce food puts a strain on natural bodies of water. Using clean water faster than it can be replenished will lead to a potential food crisis, as there will be a time when enough food cannot be produced. Biofuels, although better for the climate, use too much water and hurt the transportation of food. Water used for growing livestock is wasteful, as about 1/3 of the grain that we have is used for livestock. When using this food and water for livestock, much of it is wasted and all of it is taken away from human consumption. Clean water is wasted for personal use in the first world countries, as up to several thousand liters are wasted per person per day. This will lead to less water used for agriculture, and this can lead to a potential food crisis, especially in countries that export much of the food produced, such as the United States. Many developing countries, such as countries in the Middle East and Northern Africa region, are being paid by wealthier countries for their land to be used to grow food. This exploitation of land is harmful as it contributes to a lack of usable water and land for those countries. This will affect much of the world, as if this land becomes unusable, a potential food crisis could arise. Thus, agricultural practices, the waste of water on a personal level, the use of biofuels, and a growing population could lead to a potential food crisis.